Welcome to Grappling with the Gray, a forum for promoting an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making to help us more clearly see both sides of complex issues and better navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Rabbi Yonason Goldson, and I'd like to welcome my guest for today, Kimberly Davis, is an author, TEDx speaker, and founder of the Brave Leadership University, leading development programs worldwide around authentic leadership, purpose, presence, and influence. Mariah Edgington is a keynote speaker and, together with her husband Byron, co-author of Journey Well, You Are More Than Enough, Rediscover Your Passion, Purpose, and Love of Yourself and Life. And Mark O'Brien is founder and principal of O'Brien Communications Group, helping companies add innovation to their mindsets and their operations to create discernible, competitive advantage. Thank you all for being with
me.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us on, Yonason.
And here is today's ethics challenge. A video released last week by Project Veritas appears to show a Pfizer executive admitting that the company has at least considered producing mutations of the COVID virus in order to perpetuate its lucrative vaccine manufacturing business. If true, the video provides damning evidence of highly unethical and predatory practices. A columnist in Forbes claims to have found no legitimate source online to verify that the purported subject of the video, Trishton Walker, is indeed a Pfizer Director of Research and Development, Strategic Operations, and mRNA Scientific Planning. The video clip also seems to be severely edited, raising questions of whether the comments are provided in full context. At one point in the conversation, the subject of the video says, "Don't tell anyone about this." Is this equivalent to telling a reporter something off the record? Is recording someone without their knowledge ethical, aside from it being illegal in many states? To be clear, we are not going to be debating the benefits or risks of vaccines. That's not our topic. However, does Project Veritas have an ethical obligation to make the unedited video available to the public? Should they provide substantiation that the subject of the video is who they claim he is? Finally, if the video is authentic, what action should the government and the justice take it? What action should the government or the justice system take, particularly if these were merely musings by Pfizer executives without any actual implementation? The floor is open.
I think the first thing that I want to say is that we hear reference a lot to the fact that we live in a post-truth age. I tried to find Trishton Walker. No luck. So my own sense of this is that it's a fabrication, or it may be a figment of AI's imagination. But I don't trust it.
I completely agree with you, Mark. I did a lot of research myself after reading this scenario, and the Forbes columnist wasn't the only one who couldn't substantiate this person. It doesn't seem like anyone can. But I think when you've got a culture where success is defined by the number of clicks a piece gets, the more outrageous it is, the more attention it garnishes. And so we are a society that encourages mistruths in order to get attention.
Absolutely agree. It's one of those things where it looks like it's sensational, and we've seen there's been a lot of evidence about the vast majority of the population who believe this non-truth stuff, and they are going to just jump on this and say, "See, I told you, I knew." And I wonder if something of this grand of a nature would just bring forth the company, namely Pfizer, who would just come in and say, "This is what's been reported, and here's what we are doing about it." to investigate? And would that protect them in a way that otherwise numerous people are going to jump on that and say, oh, this must be true because I heard it on the news, or gosh, it's true because it was on the internet?
Well, you know, we believe what we see. We look for what we believe. So if we're looking for big company to do something evil, we're going to find big company that does something evil, because fear sells.
Yes.
And it is a story wrought with fear. And Pfizer actually did release a statement, and it was chock full of science that I don't myself understand. But I will always err on believing the scientists over some of these. It's so funny to call it news sources, because I think nowadays anyone with an internet connection, a phone, and a computer can call themselves a news source. And that goes to your point, Mark, where news doesn't mean what it used to mean.
No, it doesn't. And I'm sorry, Yonason, go ahead.
No, there's something very, very disturbing about an organization that calls itself Project Veritas being reasonably suspected of fabricating a story. You know, Mariah, to your point, did anyone see whether Pfizer repudiated the authenticity of the video or the person in it?
I certainly did not, but I would suggest that Pfizer has an enormous credibility problem from the very beginning, because they signed contracts with the government that completely protected them from any liability. If I had known then what I know now, I would have bought Pfizer stock. So right away, I'm not going to be inclined to believe anything that they say. And, you know, given what you were saying earlier, Kimberly, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, we are prepared and conditioned to be divided. So when I look up Project Veritas, the very first thing I see is that it's labeled by someone as a right-wing something or other. I wouldn't feel any different if it were labeled left wing. Why does it have to be labeled anything?
Yeah.
Why can't we just consider what we've heard, decide what we want about the sources, and then think critically and ask questions? I find that as troubling as anything else.
Well, I think that brings up a really good point, Mark, is our individual responsibility to think critically about things, and to not just believe what we see for face value, but to actually do the research and have discussions like this that help us dig into the conversation a little richer, so we don't immediately make decisions about people and organizations just based on hearsay.
Yeah, and I was thinking about this too when a moment ago we were talking about the news. I avoid the news like the plague. And the reason I do that is what passes for news now is some slanted interpretation of something that may or may not have happened.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't heed that, sooner or later, I'm going to come to some broader understanding of what actually did happen. And I may get information about it from a number of different sources. And then I might have enough information to start to ask the right questions and to start to formulate my own stance or perspective about it. But I don't need that stuff reported to me with any immediacy, because I can't trust what's being reported.
So where do you go for reliable information, Mark?
I'm not going to say that it's all reliable, but I don't watch television news, and I have a number of news feeds, and I will say I'm a Mac computer guy, so I get Apple News. And I will say that that's a pretty broad cross-section of things, politically speaking, left and right. And so I will just read what I have time to read there and then start thinking about that. And then sooner or later, I'll begin to see how things are playing out. But, you know, we hear this term in legal circles all the time, but I am in no rush to judgment.
Mm.
Oh, I like that. That is a really good point, because we tend to, we meaning collective society,
Mhm.
tend to judge immediately. That's our default. It's ingrained in us. And I hear information, so I must judge it right now.
Mhm.
And we know that the information we take in, no matter what it is simply information. And it is not
Mhm.
good or bad until we start judging it one way or the other.
Mhm.
And so when we're able to stop and really understand that judgment factor, it gives us a moment of time to say, is this credible? Is this a reliable source? Is this something I need to be alarmed about? Is this something I can discern a little more time and put into it and understand it a little better?
A gentleman whose name I'm not going to remember, and so if he sees this, I'm going to apologize to him for not remembering his name. But he wrote a beautiful piece yesterday on LinkedIn, and he was recalling having taken a 600-mile drive across some portion of the country with some family members when he was 10 years old, and his 2 years older brother was with him, and their grandparents were driving. And so this 10-year-old boy fell into a sleep. And when he woke up, everybody in the car was laughing. And he just assumed that they were laughing at him. And what he found out was his grandmother had been monkeying with the visor above her seat and broke it. And that, of course, upset the grandfather because he loved his car, and that's what they were laughing about. And my comment to him was, I'm a marketing guy, so I'm supposed to believe that content is king, but I don't. I believe context is king. And without what I deem to be adequate
Yes.
context, I'm not believing or judging anything.
Yes. Well, and Mariah, you talked about it's just information. Well, the fact of the matter is there's a lot of misinformation that is intentionally being sown in the world. And what we don't often enough do is dig down to really understand whose agenda is this and how are they benefiting from sowing misinformation, from creating division, from sowing fear, because somebody benefits from it when you really dig into it. And the problem is that we're not looking under the surface, who's the guy behind the curtain.
Yeah, Charlotte says in the comments that it was Jim Vinosky who wrote that, Mark.
No, actually, Jim wrote a piece about frost on the windows. I could find this gentleman.
All right.
I'll be fair to him and I'll find him.
All right, at your convenience. But I have a cardiologist. We study together 3 times a week. He's a very fine fellow, and he has been after me for some time to get my 4th booster. He's adamant that this is very important. It's a health issue, that there's absolutely no downside to getting another vaccine. I have a 30-year-old son who is a very independent-minded, not right-wing or conspiracy theorist, but just he's a bit of a skeptic, and and he's simply asking questions. How do we really know that this is safe? What about all of the circumstantial evidence that suggests there may be problems that we don't know about, or that aren't being addressed, or they're being swept under the rug? And it's very difficult to make informed decisions when we don't trust the information that's available to us.
Absolutely right.
Yeah, yeah.
And
That's
to that
absolutely
point,
true.
having been a little bit behind that curtain because I was a registered nurse, critical care emergency for years, and I've seen the other side. I've seen how some things get brushed under the rug.
Oh.
And it's a little more than disconcerting because you have to weigh that. So there's valid points on both sides of this issue. And at that point, you have to decide. And decision is based on choices that we make. Do we get vaccinated? Do we not get vaccinated? If we've already been vaccinated, how many is enough? And do we have to do this vaccine or that vaccine? These are all valid questions. And I think each individual person has an obligation to themselves and then to greater society to really look this over and make these informed decisions based on what is their truth, what's their health history, what's in it for society, for them. These aren't just simple things. These are things that people need to address individually and then collectively. And we need to be able to trust people that are putting them out.
And no decision is also a decision.
It absolutely is.
I
So
just
we can't-
put,
Go ahead,
I'm sorry.
Mark.
I just put a link in the chat window to the post I was referring to, and in fairness to the gentleman, his name is Jason Gerardo. I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. And this piece is called "Waking Up in the Backseat with Everyone Laughing."
Which seems like a title we could apply to all sorts of situations.
Yes, indeed.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I was sharing this situation with my husband this morning, and his comment was, from a business perspective, Pfizer execs would never do something like that because if it were found out, it would take the company down for good. So they would weigh, I mean, even if there was some evil-minded person who thought that this was a good idea, just from a clear business perspective, if they weighed the pros and cons of doing such a thing, the risk, from a risk assessment, they couldn't pull it off, because if in this uber connected world it were to be exposed, it would take the entire company down, which now it's really hard to keep things under the wraps that are big like that.
Well,
Just one second, Mark. I would really like to believe that's so, Kimberly, but I go back to after the 2008 meltdown, that Alan Greenspan went on record saying that he was forced to reconsider one of the most guiding foundational principles of his life, which was that companies can be trusted to do what's in their own self-interest.
And I was about to say, I want to believe that too, Kimberly, and it makes me wonder what it says about us. I think, Mariah, you used the term society. I would have said the same thing, Kimberly, if somebody had said to me, Pfizer's no liability contracts are going to be available to the public. I would have said that's going to take them down. But those contracts are available. You can find those contracts. And how that's even possible, and the company remains in business, and the company continues to produce vaccines, whatever you want to call those. Wow, that's terrifying to me. Absolutely terrifying. And also, Yonason, at the end of your question for this week, what action should the government or the system take? If we want to talk about trust issues here, I don't think that would make the slightest bit of difference. And actually, now that I've said that, the government was complicit in the no liability contracts that Pfizer was able to engage in.
Yeah, well, that's it really is staggering, and it also demonstrates an unwillingness to learn from experience, because after the bailouts of the car companies in particular, but the banks as well, all this money, I mean, unimaginable amounts of money were given with no strings attached.
Right.
And the banks, I know, in many ways were particularly unethical in the way they took that money and did not use it in a way that would be beneficial for the people or for the economy. And how does the government give away that amount of money without some kind of oversight? How does it give a company carte blanche? I can understand the reasoning behind it. We want you to create something that's going to help the public, that's going to protect people, and we don't want you to have to be worried about repercussions. But can't there be some kind of balance where there is some kind of accountability? I mean, it's difficult, it's tough.
And I don't know, when we talk about those kinds of bailout programs, I don't know how acutely we understand that's our money.
Yeah.
The government wouldn't have had it to use if we didn't give it to them. And how come we're not all screaming? I don't get that.
Sounds like we're starting to become a revolutionary website here.
Well, that's why I'm not screaming. I don't want people to overreact.
Yeah.
I just think we're so conditioned. And I think what transpires is so gradual that we just sort of take that for granted. So I want to offer a converse of that. For a while, I was a board member and sort of interim executive director for a literacy volunteers group along the Connecticut shoreline, and I was remembering an episode of All in the Family when Archie was bemoaning all of these different ethnicities, and he said something about regular Americans, and I was thinking, there aren't any more regular Americans. However, every year that literacy volunteers group has an award ceremony, because there are essay contests for people who are learning English at different levels and whatever. And one of the things that we did every year was to acknowledge the fact that some members, some students of the program had achieved their US citizenship. This was not rehearsed in any way. Nobody was instructed what to do, but I can tell you that when they were presented with a certificate that the organization gave them and a small flag, every single one of them held the flag to their hearts and got emotional about it. And I thought, if I want to believe the American dream, so to speak, is dead, I'm mistaken about that. But it's the people who have been here longest who overlook it and take it for granted. This is still the land of opportunity for all those folks. And I'm so happy that I had that experience. Otherwise, I'd be even more jaundiced than I already am.
And when you look at statistics, you see that overall, immigrants tend to do better than people who are natives.
Yeah.
It's just that the appreciation of what they have now that they didn't have before, whereas we've become of the mindset, let's look for anything that's wrong. They do the psychology experiment. They take a white piece of paper, put a dot on it, they hold it up, ask people, what do you see? People say, well, there's a black dot. Say, well, what about the whole sheet of paper that's white, except for that.
Yeah.
We focus in on something to be critical of.
Yeah.
And then we ignore all the things we have to be grateful of.
And also those people are more accustomed to earning and more determined to earn whatever they're going to get. Their expectations are very different from ours.
And that's a sad statement to our country as far as our education system and I don't mean education system in the way of, okay, this school does this or that one. Maybe it's the school of life, and how I think we've all been guilty of it, how we tend to be jaded a little bit and look at the negative, because at times there seems to be an overwhelming amount of it. And instead of bringing our focus to what we do have, I talk about abundance, and there's so many people who just can't see the abundance, but it's all around us. And it's when we
That's right.
bring our thoughts and our focus to what we do have. And to your point, Mark, those people have come, a lot of them have come from a very difficult situation. And to have the opportunity to be with us here and to be even considered to have the rights we do as citizens that we just take for granted and brush under the carpet. Because we grew up that way, and now we expect to have a little bit better. So we're going to point to somebody else who, well, they should not have gotten that. Why did I not get that? And why did they? Instead of celebrating what we do have and being of a different mind, a creative mind towards other people and to our whole community.
So perhaps the greatest thing we can do as citizens is relentless personal responsibility in going back to this topic, in really learning how to think critically for ourselves and checking our judgments at the door, so we can listen with open minds and find ways to bring empathy into our conversations so we can appreciate the differences that we bring instead of block them out.
I would also like to make the point that we need to be very careful too about what we say and the context in which we say it, because even if there is some person, Jordan Trishton Walker, it's entirely possible that if he exists and he was even speaking, whatever it is he said could have been edited to fulfill someone else's
Absolutely,
agenda.
absolutely.
And you know, one of the things that I love to do is to watch documentaries. And with Netflix and Amazon Prime Video, you can watch documentaries all day. And one of the reasons I love it is that I always try to remain mindful of or try to find the agenda of the person who did it. And that makes it just all the more fascinating to me.
Yeah, there's always a perspective.
You got that right.
Yeah, in the classic Jewish ethical work, Ethics of Fathers, the very first teaching is to be deliberate in judgment, which is somewhat different from this word that's been batted around for so long, non-judgmentalism. The sages don't say don't judge. We have to judge. We have to make judgments.
It's a choice.
But to do it deliberately.
Yeah.
To make sure we have information, to check the information sources, to check our reasoning, to talk to people who see things differently so that we can get multiple angles, which is what, you know, diversity of thought is such an important diversity of background, so that we're all coming at this from different points of view. And collectively, we can see more clearly. And you know, that sense of responsibility for individually and collectively. And then one more thing comes to mind, that I wish I could remember who the guest was. It was on Tom Bilyeu's show. What's it called? In any case, Tom Bilyeu. The guest said that he's got research that, we talk about the power of positive speaking, and he said that's good. Speaking positively is marginally beneficial, but he said that the destructive power of negative speech is extraordinary.
Yeah.
Exponentially, we can do so much damage to ourselves and to others by speaking negatively.
Mhm.
And it doesn't mean that we hide things. It doesn't mean that we're Pollyanna. It's just discipline. How we articulate, how we focus, how we engage in conversation.
Well, and I think that our social media world also makes it highly difficult because there's so much anonymity and people don't take responsibility for what they say. They forget there's another human being on the other side of that screen that's going to be receiving that. And so the things that we say to one another, we would never say to another person directly to their face. And I think that's here I'm going to go. That's a judgment that I believe that's wrong. Because I believe that if you are going to say something, whether it's in written form, you've got as much responsibility for that as you do when you're speaking it to another individual.
I think to your point, Kimberly, I think one of the things that social media, hiding behind a keyboard and a screen, does not allow us to understand, or makes it more difficult to understand, is how influential we can be. I don't think we think about that, generally speaking, when we just fire stuff off. And, Yonason, you're certainly one of the people that I credit for my wanting to be more careful about the way I say things that I believe to be true. And to think about the fact that because I believe they are true, doesn't mean they are.
Right.
And to be less presumptuous about that, and to be, I guess gentle is the right word, gentle in presenting those things.
I think that's a good way to say it. I got a call from a colleague last week. He was upset by a letter that was published by some of our colleagues, presenting a point that we agree with 100%. But the language that was used, people who did something that we don't approve of, calling them heinous.
Yeah, when it's inflammatory language, it's
the Mengeles of the world are heinous. The people who are doing things that we think are not quite upright or misrepresentative or disingenuous, it doesn't necessarily rise to that level.
Right.
And it's like calling people Nazis, which you hear all the time.
And so again, to extend the point, I think what the immediacy and the anonymity of social media invites is that kind of hyperbole.
Sure.
I'm gonna zing somebody, so I'm gonna use these words, and wow, that's gonna wake them up. Well, yeah, but it's also, given your point about negative speech, it's also going to influence them in a way that we might not even intend or choose to do.
That's true.
Well,
Mark.
and it's also going to have a whole lot of other people that it gives permission to a whole population of people to jump on that bandwagon and say inflammatory things as well.
Yeah.
So it becomes, one comment becomes an exponential impact.
Yonason, it reminds me of the conversation we had with Melissa Hughes, and we were talking about plastic bags. And if I choose to use reusable bags because I just want to look better to my neighbors, but that in turn encourages my neighbors to do something that's more responsible, I think the logic is the same. If we break that ice and we say, okay, I'm going to signal that it's okay to use this hyperbolic inflammatory language, somebody else is going to say, well,
Right,
this guy did it. Why shouldn't I
Yeah.
do it?
right.
True.
I love that circle. I do.
Yeah, well, it's self-perpetuating.
Yep.
I was really struck when I was reading George Washington's biography, that the author said that Washington, he was very, very reserved. And at the Continental Congress, said that with all these raging egos,
Mhm.
that Washington's quietly sitting on the sidelines actually drew attention to him. And I was thinking, I don't think that would happen today.
Have any of you or all of you ever been on a Zoom call with a gentleman named Phil Williams?
Don't think so.
He
No, I
lives
haven't.
in
If I
the-
have, Phil, I'm sorry.
But what you just said reminds me of Phil, because Phil is very, very quiet and perpetually composed. And when that man opens his mouth, my attention is absolutely riveted, because what he says is going to be calm and balanced and gentle and thoughtful and
Mhm.
broadly considered.
That's kind of exciting for me because he's going to encounter 360. So
Yes, he is.
I will be sitting with him in March. That is someone who demands respect from the get-go in my mind. When somebody comes in, my husband is a person of few words. And when he speaks about something and is passionate about it, sometimes I just kind of sit and just listen, because my opinion I better be solid in what I'm thinking to debate that issue. But the fact is that words have great weight.
Mm,
And when we realize that their impact, as to Kimberly's point, isn't just on us, it's who receives it.
Yeah.
And whether that receiver hears it in the way that our intent was behind it or not is out of our control. And so when we realize that, looking back at the debate we have here, or the ethical issue we have here, every single person who heard that interview or heard the downfall from it or whatever happened had a different perception of it.
I thought you were going to say words have great power. And I love the fact that you said weight. That just took me completely by surprise, but I love that notion. Beautiful.
Well, I think we also forget the ripple effect of that. So, we talked about how it gives to other people permission to join this
Permission.
conversation. But I think that the thing that we forget is when we say something, that person has a family, and the way they show up with their family based on how they experience those words being treated, it's going to affect their family. It's going to affect how they show up at work. It's going to affect their productivity. It's going to affect whether or not they vote again in the future. It's going to affect whether or not they take a vaccine in the future. It's going to affect all of these other things, which has a ripple effect that is so far reaching, we can't even imagine the other lives that we touch.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think, having mindfulness of the to use your word, Mariah, the weight of our responsibility to one another is really critical.
And I
Yeah.
think maybe I'll wrap up with a renewed pitch for my proposed political party, passionate moderates.
Yes.
Moderate, not just being moderate in one's views, but moderate in one's deportment. We can be passionate, we can be principled, and yet we can still be civil. We can be thoughtful. We can be willing to check our facts and consider points of view that may not immediately line up with our preconceptions. But if we can encourage and engage in that kind of discourse, then that's doing what we can do to try to move things in the right direction.
We might be approaching the point, Yonason, at which you could name the party extreme moderates. Because I think folks who are willing to live in and consider the middle are going to be out of the norm. So
I used to write a column for the local paper, the Post-Dispatch, and my, like most metropolitan papers, is pretty left wing. But I have a very good relationship with my editors, and my editor said to me once, you're the only moderate I know who doesn't sound flaky or wishy-washy.
It's so interesting because most of the people I know when we have conversations like this, most people I know are moderate, but because the fringe is louder on either side, the moderates get lost, and I think become somewhat apathetic too, because they don't identify with the louder voices on the platforms.
Yeah.
So the question is how do, when you are moderate, how do you be heard in such a noisy environment? And I don't know the answer to that.
I don't either.
And it's also certainly in our political structure, moderates are often punished for being collaborators,
that's right.
or
It's crazy.
Compromisers.
Yeah.
And the moderates are the one that end up, people go out to, the fringes are the ones that people go out and vote for, because they speak to this group of people that are willing to rise up. But the moderates haven't learned how to rally each other. It's too bad.
There's one of the proposals I've heard recently is that apparently our election system is different from most of the world in that we have independent primaries for the respective parties.
Mhm.
And that encourages extremism.
Yeah.
Because you can pander to the extreme and you can win that way.
Right.
By setting yourself
That's
apart.
right.
Whereas if the primary were open to everyone, then mainstream candidates would have a much better chance, because they'd be able to draw on that large but not as loud and militant extreme fringe.
I do believe in the cyclical nature of everything, and that what goes around does indeed come around. And Malcolm Cowley said something along the lines of, at some point, individualism becomes a uniform in spite of itself. And I think we may get to a point at which, to the way you expressed it, Kimberly, the people on the fringes just kind of wear out their welcomes, and they require so much energy to try to keep up with. And I think maybe, as the wheel turns, we just sort of come back to some more moderate, calm, considered, contemplative center.
I would so love to believe that, Mark, but when our news cycles are propped up by what gets attention, I don't know that I believe, with the way our social media connected world is, there's going to have to be a big shift in order for that to happen.
Well, that's why I call myself a fatalist wearing rose-colored glasses.
I love that. That's awesome. I want to borrow them.
we're going down the tubes, but I always hold out hope that we won't.
Well, I don't think we have to believe that things will get better, but I think we need to believe that things can get better.
And I think that takes us right back to Kimberly's point about individual responsibility.
Yeah, that's where it starts.
One of my favorite books is If You Meet the Buddha on the Road, Kill Him. And it's written by a psychotherapist out of the experience of working with his patients. And the fundamental notion is, if you think whatever the answer is, is out there somewhere or it's in another person, it's right here. You got to bring it.
I think that's a good place to wrap this up. I let us run long because I think the conversation was quite worthwhile. And that it's a good place to start and end is personal responsibility. We can't change others, but we can't take responsibility for ourselves. And if we start there, who knows what ripples might extend. So thank you all for a really stimulating
Thank
conversation.
you, Rabbi.
Yeah,
Kimberly
thank
Davis.
you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Right,
Yonason.
Edgington,
Thank you.
Mark O'Brien. I hope I'll be seeing all of you and each of you again. For those of you who are watching or listening, if you have a ethical scenario or dilemma you'd like us to take up, please go to yonasongoldson.com, use the contact information and submit it if it's compelling. We definitely will take it up. And I'd like to thank the people who have been very active in the chat today, which is something that is nice to see. Hope you'll be with us in the future when we get together for our future panels and grapple with the gray.
Thank you.